Hi, Steve.
Hello.
I'm
Good to
still
be with.
s- I'm still starstruck. So allow me a little bit of a narcissistic moment. Uh, I'm probably the first Filipino who will be interviewing you. Am I right?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't know,
Okay.
one
All
or
right.
two,
All right.
but
Okay. That's fine.
very small numbers.
Okay. I lost the moment. Just kidding. Okay. But thank you for this, Steve. The first book I ever well, it's not the first book I read. It's the first book that really made me understand what acceptance and commitment therapy is your get out of your mind into your life. And my
Yeah.
Google search was Act for Dummies.
Oh, I'm glad that showed up.
That's the first thing that showed up. And I probably listened to that book on the audiobook
Yeah.
probably 20 times or more. I still
Wow.
listen to it once in a while. Awesome book. Anyway, so to my Filipino audience, this is Dr. Steve Hayes. It's like me interviewing somebody like B.F. Skinner or Sigmund Freud in their times. Just a short introduction. I got this from his website. Stephen C. Hayes is a Nevada Foundation professor of psychology and behavior analysis program at the University of Nevada. uh, an author of 47 books, nearly 670 scientific articles. His career is focused on an analysis of the nature of human language and cognition and the application of this to the understanding and alleviation of human suffering. He's the developer of relational frame theory, an account of human higher cognition, and has guided its extension to acceptance and commitment therapy, a popular evidence-based form of psychotherapy that uses mindfulness, acceptance, and values-based methods. All right, let me breathe. He is a co-developer of process-based therapy, a new approach to evidence-based therapies more generally. Dr. Hayes has written a small number of books for the public, in addition to many books for professionals. His first, Get Out of Your Mind into Your Life, written with Spencer Hayes, was written up in a 5-page story in Time magazine in February of 2006. For Time was the #1 best-selling self-help book in the United States over Harry Potter. His latest, A Liberated Mind, which I have a copy of in my ebook reader, How to Pivot toward what matters, tells the scientific and personal story of psychological flexibility, topped out as among the top 800 best-selling books on Amazon. Wow. His TEDx talks and YouTube presentations for the public exceed 1 million views. So there's more. I just had to edit it. In 1992, otherwise I won't finish this. In 1992, he was listed by the for Scientific Information as the 30th highest impact psychologist in the world. And Google Scholar data ranks him among the top 100, 1,100 most cited scholars in all areas of study, living and dead. And for me personally, most of all, I, I mean, the reason why I love his work is I can identify with several aspects of Dr. Hayes' journey through life and psychology. I was also a product of a violent home and have been influenced by the humanistic approaches in psychotherapy in the past. And we still are, right, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay. So this is something for the general Filipino audience. So I'd like you, Steve, to start off by telling our Filipinos uh, more about you, uh, your journey, your work. Just a short introduction, besides maybe something that I haven't mentioned from what I just read.
Well, I mean, I'm a psychologist who studies cognition, the things that you talked about. But, I really came into psychology because I thought that psychology shouldn't just be about mental illness and things like that. It should be about how to live a life that really matters and makes a difference. And the kind of people who brought me into psychology were people who were interested in advancement and peak experiences and, being able to live an extraordinary life. And that's something I think that all of us kind of yearn for. What is a life well lived? Abraham Maslow got me into psychology, a humanistic psychologist who asked that question, even of very well-known people, and came up with some principles. And I wanted to have principles that just normal people could use and that I could use. And frankly, you mentioned some of the family history. Part of it was that I'm trying to understand, as most psychologists are, they're either a little odd themselves or they come of families that are a little odd because they're trying to understand why is it hard to be human and what can we do about it. And that became of special relevance to me in my academic journey when I kind of unexpectedly developed panic disorder. But I'd started out more interested just in how to, aspire to something and to, I think, try to understand what was going on with my alcoholic dad or my obsessive compulsive mother or things of that kind. Why was it so hard for them? And why did they argue so much? Why did they fight? Why were they so miserable? They were so loving, so kind in so many ways, and yet they couldn't get out of their own way. And then here I come around and I'm in the same situation as a young academic, almost unable to give a lecture to 3 undergraduates at a time. I mean, almost unable to make sound come out of my mouth. I get that anxious. And the same question shows up. Why is this so hard? You can't look around you and see areas in living organisms where it's this hard when you have everything. I mean, you can imagine what it's like to be a dog without food or a horse without water, but you have a really hard time looking around the natural world and saying, what about suffering amidst plenty? And we had food and water and all that kind of stuff. My parents were miserable much of the time. And I had everything that, you could expect. I mean, a PhD, a really nice position, students who cared about me, wonderful things to do. And I couldn't even make sound come out of my mouth. So I guess, I'm just a person who has that interest of why is it hard to be human? What can we do about it? And can we aspire to something better? And now 45 years into that journey, and about 40 years into the journey with acceptance and commitment therapy, relational frame theory, I'm here with an answer, not the final answer, there is no final answer, but with an answer that looks as though it's progressive. And I'm still pushing the edge, trying to find things that we don't know, process-based therapy you kindly mentioned, and so forth. So as a personal and familial and cultural and scientific journey, I'm here because I'm curious about why it's so hard to be human, what we can do about it, and how we can be the best selves that we know how to be.
Okay. Thank you for that, Steve. There's a question related to that. I'll probably go to that later. And that's something that you introduced to therapy, which is values. So it's really completely like, oh, we can have values in therapy. Okay. So anyway, my second question is, you're quite vocal about your frustrations regarding the biomedicalization or DSMization. Sorry to start with such a controversial topic. First question. I'm an angry person, so I like fights. Just kidding. Anyway, just kidding. Can you tell us what you are advocating for? And one of the more common arguments for the DSM is that there's a need to be able to communicate what we mean when we talk about certain mental health categories or classifications.
Yes.
So in that case, if we're not about What is the alternative then? How do we talk to each other as people in this business?
Well, I agree there is a need for categories in communication, but they need to fit the purpose of categories and what you're trying to do. And it's not the bio part that I object to in this biomedicalization of human suffering. It's the normative categories that are easily interpreted that way. Look, life can move forward in a positive way in ways that we were just talking about, or it can move in negative ways. And when it moves in negative ways, it has some features, things happen, you tend to have more negative emotions, you tend to have more negative thoughts, you tend to have more negative memories and so on. And sometimes in the history of science, it's been a good idea to try to just categorize and collect those, sort of like collecting seashells on the shore and saying, see, I've got 10 of these and they have the same shape. And over here, I have 10 more, they have the same color. Maybe you can figure out something that way.
Mm-hmm.
But we're 40 and 50 years in of trying to do a better job of alleviating human suffering and empowering individuals to live lives that are full of meaning and purpose. And there's no indication, none, that the way that we're categorizing is helping us on that. The problems aren't getting less frequent, they're getting more frequent. The therapies aren't getting more and more effective.
Mm-hmm.
There's side effects to many of the therapies we use, especially the biomedical ones have side effects that people don't talk about, and then eventually research it, and it's like, whoops, antidepressants can increase suicidality. Oh, well, wait a minute, really? Yes, really. Oh, and by the way, if you stay on antidepressants, you can actually have sexual side effects that may be lifelong. Oh
Okay.
dear, that's not so good. Or if you're on antipsychotic medications with movement disorders that we know are lifelong, and on it goes. So let's push the reset button and look and see what is the best way. Now, one of the things that you're right, in order to come up with another way of talking about things or another way of thinking about things, we're going to have, concepts that we can use. Well, and so where I've moved towards in the work on process-based therapy is, what if we talked about our problems as linked to the processes of change that we know are critical from getting from here to there with psychological struggles and relationship problems and things? And what if we looked and categorized, not just by the formal features, but by what are the dynamic and functional properties? Let me use a metaphor. It would be like if we were trying to categorize flowers, and we said, well, we can count how many petals, how many blooms are on a stem, what color they are. And of course, we did that in early botany. We did that.
Okay.
And it was, to this day, you can say botanization, and people will understand what you probably mean is categorizing things by their formal features. But you got many, many things that didn't make any sense when you did that. And it wasn't until we understood how genes work and how the actual development of the flower works that we were able to categorize them properly. You could have two things that look very similar that were different, or two things that look very different that were similar. I'll give you an example. There's a flower called toad flax. And there was a famous issue where it had another flower look completely different that they called basically the monstrosity version of toad flax in Latin. And it turns out they're genetically identical. What's different is that one of them has a little methylation of cytosine. One of the genes has a methyl group. So it's an epigenetic mutation. Not genes. The genes are identical. They're the same plant, genetically, but they're different plant epigenetically. Well, that's really cool because the flowers look completely different. But you understand that how it developed, this little aberration on the genome, the same gene, it's the same plant. Produces these two very different flowers. Well, what would be like that with humans? So let me give you an example. My mother was diagnosable as having OCD.
Okay.
She was diagnosable as having major depression.
Okay.
If I just described the features, she would get to the point where she would be very sad. She wouldn't move, hardly, literally physically wouldn't move. She would stand in front of the oven and open the door and put her rear end in it because she was a little cold in our house. And
Okay.
she would warm her rear end with leaning into the oven.
Uh-huh.
And I would come out I must be 8 years old, 9 years old, and day after day after day, no matter what time of the day I went, there's my mother and she hasn't moved.
Okay.
And even I knew that's not normal. There's something wrong there. Something's going on. She would, every time I leave the house, say, "Don't eat the oleander." There's a plant right outside the door, oleander. It's poisonous. If you eat it, you'll get very sick. You might even die.
Okay.
But every single time I left the house, she would remind me not to eat the oleander.
Oh.
Okay, so there you have these patterns. Well, now let me tell you one more fact that I didn't find out until about 3 years ago. And on 23andMe, the little genetic thing, it turned out that I had my mother's sister's son living just 100 miles away from me, and I didn't know that. The youngest son of my grandmother's sibling, still alive. I went and visited him, and he told me something that has changed my view of my entire life and of my entire childhood.
All right.
That my mother's mother was in a tuberculosis sanitarium and could never leave. And her husband divorced her because she was unable to leave the TB sanitarium. That's what they did with tuberculosis back in those days.
Yeah.
So she asked my mother to quit college, move back, live nearby, and come and visit her. And my mother said, "I could only come in a little bit, Mom, and I'll have to quit school. And don't ask me this of me. Please don't." And she said, "No." This is now I'm being told by my cousin, I guess it would be, or is it? Anyway. And then one more thing. This is what changed my world, and it'll change you in hearing the story. And you understand why I'm using this example.
Okay.
And he says to me, and when my mother said to her mother, "I can't come back and do that for you," a week later, my grandmother, my mother's mother, killed herself.
Oh.
So, my mother's saying, "Don't eat the oleander." She's washing her hands until it bleeds. She doesn't move. Can you imagine what it's like to carry the burden that maybe you killed your mother?
Yeah. Okay.
Think about what that would be like for the rest of your life. You'd have to have that constantly in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
And so what I would say my mother's real problem was, it was not depression.
Okay.
That's not really the depression. It wasn't OCD really. What it was what do I do with a sense of shame and of self-blame and of self-loathing and of horror when I remember and have the thought that I was responsible for my mother's death? Well, that's really hard. You need a lot of work to learn how to carry emotions and thoughts that are that painful. But could I say to my mother, who's dead and gone, I never had this conversation, "This was not your fault. Your mother killed herself, not you. And yeah, it would have been nice for you every once in a while to visit her, but you weren't going to get her out of the TB sanitarium. And you quitting college, that was maybe an unreasonable ask. And there was something else that should have been. And for goodness sakes, Grandma, why didn't you say, I'm so miserable with my husband divorcing me, and get help as to walking through that misery instead of tagging your daughter, who then, suffered for the rest of her life because of what you did, not because of what she did. You're the one who killed yourself, not my mother. She didn't kill you. And yes, I'm not blaming you either, because you didn't know how to carry, I'm talking to my grandmother, you didn't know how to carry the pain of rejection from your loved husband.
Mm.
And that's a really, really, really hard thing to carry. So what if we instead, just like those toad flaxes, instead of just looking at the formal appearances, we looked at how did it get to be that way and categorize it that way. And so I would say, Grandma, you were experientially avoidant. You didn't know what to do with the pain of rejection. The only thing you knew to do was try to soothe, and you tagged your daughter to try to somehow ameliorate your pain with an unreasonable request, probably. Maybe it wasn't unreasonable, but in any case, you didn't do your work first. Walk through the rejection of your husband and what that's like first. You handle that, and then see what else needs to be done and ask for help from those who love you. And Mom, I'd say you learned experiential avoidance honestly. Obviously, your mother at least taught you how to do this. And by the way, your son has made a career out of it. And ask my wife, I'm still not very good at it, but I'm learning. I'm getting a little better at being more emotionally open. Learning how to be emotionally open when you're carrying painful things is something that's hard, but it's something that all of us are being asked to do. We're being asked to do it right now, watching the Ukrainian war. I was just looking at what happened in that town right outside Kiev. And I'm looking at people with their hands tied behind their back who are shot through the head and are lying in the street with dogs sniffing at them, and a mine placed on their back so that if you try to bury them, it'll blow up and kill you. I mean, you look at that and you go, oh, I'll have that in my head for the rest of my life. You will too. Just go on the TV tonight. You can see it, and your children. So we better learn how to categorize human suffering by the processes that produce it. And I would say my mother and my grandmother had an experiential avoidance disorder. And I wish that they had learned. Me too. And I think I'm still not great at it. But I think I've gotten good enough at it now that I can handle pretty good levels of anxiety and sadness and loneliness and things like that. Knock on wood. I don't want to be too prideful about it. Life has a way of throwing you a curveball when you say things like that. Okay, how about this?
I agree with that.
You know, I hope I don't get that horrifying call that something bad has happened to my children or something. But so that's the way I would answer. The DSM should be categorizing instead the processes of change that have gone awry, that have led to the human misery. Do it empirically. Don't make a guess. Don't say, oh, it must be brain circuits when you don't know that. Or it must be, different levels of neurotransmitters when you don't know that. Or it must be genes when you don't know that. No, go and find out what you can find out and categorize it that way. And the great thing that you'll do for human beings is that now they know what needs to change. If you have an experiential avoidance disorder, you'll need to learn how to be more experientially open. If you have OCD, what are you supposed to do? I mean, it's not in the diagnosis. And yeah, we have treatments. So I'm not saying we don't. I'm just saying our conversations are all about what we have rather than what we're doing or the actual processes that are unfolding. And it actually disempowers people instead of empowers people. You think it destigmatizes and so forth, but no, because as soon as you have that category, you start wearing it like a suit, your future becomes more shortened. What do you expect of me? I've got major depression. I mean, we literally have accommodations now at the work site and everywhere. We're kind of, and as we do that, is suffering going down or up? It's going up. So I've given you too long an answer to your question, but that's my problem, is these categories aren't serving us, the people who are suffering, nor the treatment community. And there are alternatives already available that do serve us.
Okay.
So let's do that.
Wow, that's first time I've ever heard of that. You use that term, experiential avoidance disorder. Maybe can we call it fusion disorder or
Yeah, sure, of course you can.
self as
Now, one thing
content?
you do,
Self as
absolutely.
content.
So the concepts, absolutely, you can do this, but one warning, and you do that. Humans are complex systems.
Okay.
So we need to look at all of the psychological levels. And by the way, the ACT terms, for example, you take something like fusion. Fusion is our term for cognitive rigidity and for buying into the literal quality of thoughts. But there's other forms of cognitive rigidity, the failure, the inability to think a variety of thoughts. Being creative and open and being able to think many different thoughts, that's a really awesome skill.
Yeah.
So I think when we dive into the different psychological dimensions of emotion and cognition, of attention, sense of self, motivation, and overt behavior, at least those 6, but also the sociocultural level and its dimensions, but also the biophysiological level and its dimensions, diet, sleep, exercise, etc. When we've done all of that, then disorders can be named by the sets of processes that have gone awry across all of those dimensions and how they interrelate. So let me just give you one example. You mentioned fusion, and I said experiential avoidance disorder because it fit the example of my mother and my grandmother so well, and me. But in fact, part of that would probably also include a cognitive fusion element. And so it's not going to be a single process.
Okay.
And this you might, we'll give another name for that. Let's say the experiential avoidance, let's say I'm avoiding, but also I'm self-judging.
Okay.
And I'm tangled in that self-judgment.
Okay.
So maybe we could call that being, experientially closed in the emotional and cognitive domains. Or experientially, or rigid cognitively and emotionally. So for you, there may be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different processes all interlinked, like a spider web that's interlinked, or like a network.
Okay.
And we have that in physical disease. Lots of medical conditions are multifaceted.
Okay.
And when you really want to get a good provider, they're trying to do personalized medicine and understand how multiple facets fit together instead of just taking one and calling that the problem. They won't just say, oh, you got diabetes. They might also say, yeah, and you are way overweight and you're not exercising, and all those things go together to produce metabolic syndrome, which leads to diabetes. And so the diabetes is a face of something it's more multifaceted. And in the same way, I think psychology and social problems are like that.
All right. Wow, we're halfway through our time, and I only asked my second question.
Well,
Remember,
I have a URL called Steve's Rants. I've never used it, but I have it. And why would I have it? Because I do this. So my friend, you have to make ugly faces.
I have 11 questions. Okay, not 2. It's 1 and 1. All right. 1 and 1 is 11. I heard you say once. Okay, let me go through this really quick. This is a pretty long question. When you said once, I heard this in one of your longer talks. When you give license, you can take license.
Yeah.
All right. Now, sometime during the pandemic, there was a high cabinet official in government because we are exporting our nurses abroad. You probably know that. You don't. Anyway, yeah. So that's one of our major export producers, people. We send people abroad.
Trained people.
So
you need.
I'm sorry.
Trained people you need.
Yeah,
After
we need.
Leave.
We needed nurses back. I mean, we always have a shortage of nurses, right? But we can't pay them enough. So there was a high government official who proposed to get rid of the board exams for nurses. He said it's unfair and unnecessary. He was widely criticized and his idea was quickly dismissed. I've also heard you talk about Dr. Todd Rose in his book, The End of Average.
Yeah.
That was a game-changing book for me. I had some concerns about how we do things, and that just crystallizes everything
Yeah,
everything I suspected was a problem. So he argues about how we lose so much talent because of a system where we measure people's abilities and potential by testing many people one time.
yeah.
So can you tell our audience more about this idea of moving towards more an individualized approach to research and helping people, and how it relates to how we do, uh, how we train psychologists, how we allow them to work, or how we do psychotherapy?
Yeah. Well, you've given me a question that has many interesting ideas in it, and some ideas that I've spent a fair amount of time recently thinking about. And the point in the end of average is that if you want to predict how people are going to do across time, measure them frequently across time, and model their trajectories, look at what empowers or disempowers them. And yeah, compare it to other people, but only after you understand each. So you investigate and analyze first, and then you combine. What we've tended to do ever since the days of Francis Galton and classical statistics and bell curve and things you learned in high school, probably standard deviations and percentile rank. I mean, our children know I'm 98th percentile. I mean, they can
Yeah,
repeat back what
yeah.
things told on various kinds of things. But it turns out that those bell-shaped curves are comparisons between people. And they were done originally with the idea that they would predict the trajectories of people.
Okay.
It turns out that that's false. It's statistically, mathematically impossible to do that. And the physicists have known that for 100 years or more. It's been proven science for at least 90 years in statistical physics. And psychology is just catching up. Because if you actually think about it, at a given moment, I can compare you to others, but I don't know how you got there.
Okay.
By doing that, right? And if I'm going to project from there forward, I have to know how you will get there, meaning in the future. Yeah. And often we're trying to do that with what's going to happen if you have a disorder, what's going to happen if I do this treatment, what's going to happen if you exercise, what's going to happen if you change your diet, what's going to happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are projections forward. The best way to assess that is to look at temporal patterns within the individual. Now, the reason why Galton did this, and the people who followed, Galton was the grandson of Erasmus Darwin, just like Charles Darwin was a grandson of Erasmus Darwin. They were cousins. And Galton, his first book in 1860, his first book goes 10 years after Origins of the Species. And Galton was fascinated by the chapter on artificial selection, on being able to breed animals. That was in Charles Darwin's book. And that was very early on. This was before herd books and things like that. There was hardly any species. There was with horse races, race horses. Just a few animals where they kept track of, but only for like 50, 100 years. It was that recent, like what we do now with bulls and sheep and all that kind of stuff was just starting back then. And what Galton thought, looking at it, was the upper class of the United Kingdom is de-evolving because it's not having children at the same rate as lower classes. And he wrote a book called Hereditary Genius, in which he argued that we could eliminate criminality, disease, and all these things if we compared people and took the highest level of people and made sure they had children, but not the lowest level people. Well, there's a name for that. It's called eugenics. And we went through a horrible period in the last century where we saw where that led. But if you ask, what job did Carl Pearson's R, the correlation coefficient, or Ronald Fisher, Fisher's Z, the statistical, well, or Frank Yates, his correction of a chi-square distribution. If you've had any classical stat classes, you know names like that. And if you ask what they were professors of, the answer is not statistics, but eugenics. So here's the sad history of statistics. They were meant to sort people, not to empower people. And if you're going to empower people, you have to understand processes of change. What are the ones that take you in a negative direction? What are the ones that are take you in a positive direction? And you can be at the 1 percentile, and if you get the right processes, you can move right on up, maybe. Even though you'd predict, if you're just living inside Galton's eugenic dreams, if you're down at the 1%, you'll never get better. Can I tell a personal story on that? Do I have time for a story?
Well, that's the third question, so we still have 8 to go.
You have to give me permission. It's about a 4-minute story.
I have all the time in the world. I have 3 hours allocated for this. So,
Okay.
but
Well,
here's
the personal story.
Okay.
My son, when he was 2.5 years old, couldn't hold a knife and fork, couldn't hold a pencil, couldn't do a push-up, couldn't hang on the monkey bars, couldn't do a sit-up. He was 1 percentile in physical strength. And the pediatrician and then the physical therapist that we were sent to looked my wife and I in the eye and said, he has a genetic disorder. What was the evidence for it? Because he's 1 percentile in strength. His muscles will get stronger with use, but barely. With a lot of work, we can maybe get him to hold a knife and fork and cut his own food. But don't put him in any kind of competitive athletics or something, because he will never, ever be good at it. So we did put him in the classes, and I put him in martial arts because it's one at a time and you're comparing yourself only to yourself. And I had a teacher who loved him, Michelle Weaver, almost like a second mother. And so from age 3.5 forward, he would go and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice, and he would eventually improve a little bit. We were always a little embarrassed to watch him because it wasn't very good, but we knew he had a genetic disorder. And I did have to listen to him say every time he went to class, I'm committed to constant, never-ending improvement towards black belt excellence, ma'am. And I would think, like, son, you're never going to get a black belt. Because I know what it takes to get a black belt, and they don't give you a black belt because you have a muscle disorder. They give you a black belt because you can run 6-minute miles, 50 push-ups at a time. You can do the splits. You can jump 32 inches. I mean, the requirements are beyond imagination for this little boy who had, who nobody would pick in preschool to be on their teams. If they have 2 soccer teams, he would never get picked. The teachers have to force some poor team to take him in the schoolyard, or he'd never even get exercise because he was that bad. Well, he's 14. He's worked all these years. He's still saying towards black belt excellence. Now he doesn't sound like a little 3.5-year-old. And I'm still going, never going to happen. And Michelle referred him to a man named Max McManus, because she said, if you don't get stronger, you're not going to make it. And so Stevie, my son Stephen, little Stevie, was sent to Max McManus. Well, if you watch the Winter Olympics, and if you happen to watch the skiing half pipe in the Winter Olympics, you might have noticed a guy named David Wise who got a silver there in China, but in the preceding Olympics had a gold, and the preceding Olympics had a gold. He's from Reno, Nevada, and his strength coach is named Max McManus, the same man. And he has a little coach place, and people come, and Stevie goes and does his workouts there, and there's David Wise, the guy who just won the silver. And before that, 2 golds. Well, I go to Max, and this is right before COVID, and I say, Max, would you work with my son? About a year before COVID. And he said, yeah, sure. And I said, but here's the problem. He's got a muscle disorder. He's genetically at 1%. You know, he's never going to be able to be strong. And he listens to me. And he kind of sneers. And Max says, I don't give a shit about any of that. Let's see what he can do. And I sit back and watch the first lesson and I go, oh my God. And then the second and the third and the fourth. And with 1 month, he was 20% stronger than he was a month earlier.
Oh.
Max had him doing amazing, crazy, really weird exercises. Plus, he's doing things like this. I don't think you can do it, Stevie. You're not strong enough. You can't do it. Stevie says, yeah, let me try. I said, no, I don't want you to try. You can't. Yeah, maybe. But you have to go all the way up to here. So I can do it. I can do it. Okay. I mean, he was doing every psycho trick in the book. And Stevie was like, I'm going to show you I can do it. He has his black belt. He's getting his second black belt. He teaches in the dojo. Oh. He teaches children, and he's now going for a black belt in jiu-jitsu, which is this violent kind of wrestling form of martial arts, which is not for the faint of heart. He comes back with scrapes and bruises every time he goes. And if I showed you a videotape of this guy, he's stronger, bigger, faster, more agile than I am in every possible way. He's probably, in terms of strength, about 75th percentile. When he went to Max, my guess is he was 10th percentile. He started out first percentile. So here's my point. Galton's eugenic dreams are a lie. Where you are in the standard deviation is not your future. It's where you are in this moment of time compared to others. What your future is composed of are the processes of change that you're able to implement. Now, I'm not saying everybody can get a black belt. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying everybody can graduate from college, or even that everybody can speak or everybody can walk. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying, when you go to your pediatrician and they say, with your baby, and you're all afraid, and it's the first visit and you're getting your development, and they say, is your baby crawling by 12 months? And you say, no. And they say, oh, well, that's the standard. You need to know that there's 13 different ways to walk, and some babies never crawl. And then they stand up and walk. Okay. They scoot on their diapered butts until their legs get strong enough and they stand up and walk. What your pediatrician should be doing is saying, what is your baby doing? Okay. What does that fit in terms of processes of change? Is that a known pattern that can lead within people towards successfully walking? Not is it average, is it normal? You read the Todd Rose book, you know the error. It's a cognitive error. And it's built into our healthcare system. It's built into our diagnostic system. It's built into our normal language. It's even built in there with the word normal. Do you know that the word normal didn't exist in the English language until the Civil War? So we've swilled down this Kool-Aid of normal and averages and bell-shaped curves and taken it on as the prediction of our lives, move forward. And it's a statistical error. It's basically a scientific lie, and people's lives are being crushed by it. So coming back to your question,
would you agree with that? Nurses, it's unfair that, you test them one time and they lose everything, all the 4 years that they've studied in college.
Yeah, I don't think that's the way it should be done. And I do think it's good to have licenses for competencies and so forth, but we should make sure that people develop those skills, and if they fall off, that they can reacquire or develop them further. We should be interested in the development of excellence. But this kind of horrifying thing that we're doing with our entrance exams to college and our one-time exams for licensure and they're not set up to predict properly what happens going forward. Mm-hmm. Is treating ourselves almost as objects and not as. Didn't you use the phrase earlier about yourself that you're still in development?
Yeah.
That's you were getting going.
Yeah.
Well, me too. And what if we all viewed ourselves as forgive me for living, but I'm still in the process of developing. And then have ways of speaking about how to empower development.
A work in
And
progress. A work
a
in
work in
progress.
progress. That was the word you used. And aren't we all that, my friend?
Yes.
We're all that.
Yes.
So where are our concepts that respect that reality? And it's not these top-down categorical concepts.
Well, it's gonna be a long way to go, because he was completely dismissed. He was even labeled a cuckoo. Anyway, for having that idea. All right. So next question. It's a little bit more social issue, but kind of also related to psychotherapy and how people here in our country perceive it. Some, a big chunk,
Yeah.
and you probably have that also in your population. I heard you say before that there are around, I don't know, I'm not sure, 16 different gender preferences based on
Yeah.
studies. We are a very religious country.
Yes.
We are the only country in the world that does not allow divorce. We don't have marriage equality, nor do we allow women access to safe and legal abortions.
Sure.
There is also a significant segment of the population who see psychology as a possible threat to their faith.
Sure.
Can you tell us more about ACT, or process-based therapy, and how it lines up with religion? And how does the mind hijack the faith traditions? I know that I know a little
Yeah.
bit about your stand on that, but uh, I think the audience would love to hear that directly from you.
Yeah. Well, I think our faith traditions and our wisdom traditions are mostly wise. I mean, after all,
Mhm.
they've been serving humanity. They didn't come out of nowhere. They came out of somewhere where,
Mhm.
they made a difference in people's lives. And but I do think we have to be careful. Oh, two things. One is that most religious faith includes a way of embracing the natural world. And it depends on how you read scripture and so forth to allow that. I really am buoyed up in the area of psychology to see that the deepest psychological findings that we find in our field almost always line up with the major religions. I mean, the major religions overlap a lot. There's not many that really, maybe an individual minister, priest, or whatever, but there are not many who teach hate, who teach intolerance, who teach, they teach love, they teach forgiveness, hate the sin, love the sinner. And there's things in there that are softer, and
Mhm.
the importance of values, the importance of considering the other person and treating them the
Yeah.
way that you would want to be treated,
Mhm.
and on it goes. Well, the things that are in the ACT model are almost all easily supported in scriptural traditions of all the major religions. You can
Mhm.
pick it. And so there's a reason why, whether you're, well, in the Abrahamic religions, it's easy peasy. Why? I mean, I was visited by a group of conservative Hasidic Jews 3 weeks ago.
Mhm.
I received an email this morning from a person who's modifying ACT to fit with Islam.
Mhm.
I just wrote an endorsement 3 days ago of a Christian, a book on ACT and Christianity,
Uh,
because you see in these scriptural traditions that
mm,
these features line up.
mm,
Now, on certain kinds of things, like you talked about abortion, abortion is a really difficult moral issue, and
mm,
spiritual traditions and religious
mhm,
traditions have wavered on that, have different ideas on it. I mean, I was raised as a Catholic,
uh,
and the idea of the quickening, and when life starts and so forth is kind of,
yeah.
but I think that's a political issue that we can work through.
Mhm.
The different kinds of gender, that's the point of that, is that we have sometimes denied what the facts are. And we do want to start with the facts. I did a fair amount of work for Sir John, well, a reasonable amount of it, for Sir John Templeton, the Templeton Foundation, who to this day, Templeton Foundation funds a number of sort of religiously informed psychological efforts. And he had what he called it humble religion. And what he meant was religion should never get in the place that it has to deny facts in order to embrace faith. And I think science advancement does ask that of our religious traditions. Inform our morality, inform our vision of where we're going in life and so forth. That's fine. But be careful about confusing books that are about faith traditions with physics books. There are different kinds of books, and physics is constantly advancing. If you're a believer in a faith tradition, you probably think that the basic tenets of your faith will be there 100 years from now. They're not going to be changing very much. Well, science will be changing. So if you turn it into something that you're going to take it to be science, like the Earth was created in 7 days or something like that, that's not where it started, because science came after the major religions were already formed. B, you have put yourself in a very vulnerable position, I think, needlessly. You probably, if you were going to get a heart operation, would look to see the training of the person of being able to do operations and what they know about their operation of the heart and so forth. You probably, unless you're maybe a Christian Scientist or something, in which case you wouldn't be getting the operation, you probably wouldn't expect, a 2,000-year-old scripture to tell you how to do the heart operation. So it's a difficult area, I think. What I have tried to do is to give persons of faith, pastoral counselors, clergy, what we know about the facts of psychological development that they can use in their work and in their sermons and in their counseling. And so, for example, we've created programs in ACT. And the US military chaplains themselves voted to adopt motivational interviewing, problem-solving therapy, and ACT as the three things that all chaplains are trained in if you're going to work for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, etc., in the US of A. I'm proud of that, and it's because they recognize this is very friendly, not just as Christianity, because the chaplains in the US military include imams and ministers and priests and rabbis and every religion. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, I still have six questions. Maybe this could be a one-word answer for the next, the remainder of my questions.
Well, if you still have the time, I'll try to keep it shorter, but I have the time. So.
All right. So, okay, I get this a lot. When people call me. So I have a problem with my sister or my daughter, but they don't want to come to therapy because there is still a stigma towards mental health concerns here in the Philippines. I'm not crazy. Why should I? People are afraid to talk about concerns regarding mental health problems. And if you were talking to someone, like a relative of somebody they want to put into therapy or counseling, how would you advise someone on the phone to speak to the loved one who doesn't want to come?
Yeah, I'd say what therapy is really about is not fixing you. You're not broken. It's about empowering you and about, being able to give you validated, scientifically validated advice about how to move forward, given what you want. And so I'm not very interested in helping you to go to therapy to be categorized and labeled and, being told what you're supposed to do independently of what you want. But I can see that you're unhappy. I can see that you're struggling. And you know that because you asked me about these things.
Mhm.
And I'm telling you, there are people who are professionals
Mm.
who will listen and who will take what we know about how the mind works, how
Mhm.
emotions work, how your own history plays out, how behavior works, and be of use to you towards what you want. And I don't even know what all those things are, because if you were to tell me some of the things that are going on, maybe things you're ashamed of, or things that are hard for you, or things you're addicted to, you don't want to talk about, or secrets that you have, or things that have happened in your life, or yearnings that you have, and hopes that you have, and desires you have that's a secret, it may go to the grave with it. Yeah, but what if you had somebody who was paid
Mhm.
to listen and to
Yeah.
care and apply their professional knowledge only
Uh-huh.
to you, for you?
Okay.
They're not trying to manipulate you or make you do something.
Mhm.
And if and I know people who are good. I've done some of the homework, and if you're open to it, I will give you those referrals.
Okay.
And I'll tell you one thing: it is I'm out of role. If the person's been in therapy themselves, hopefully they have. That when things have been hard for me, I found it useful, and uh, other friends of mine have found it useful. And it's not a matter of being crazy. It's a matter of being human and needing somebody in your corner who's there just for you, who's actually paid to be there just for you. And so, yeah. So and now the person can be free to say, no, I'm not interested. I'm not doing it. Well, great. Okay. It's a free world. You can do that. But, if you keep doing what you've been doing, you'll keep getting what you've been getting. I mean, that's the way it works. And if you see a friend or a family member who really needs help, and when you offer it in that way,
Mm.
in the way that they control it, it's for them, it's
Uh-huh.
their goals.
Okay.
You're not going to intrude, you're not come down, it's not a wagging finger.
Okay.
It's more of a helping hand.
Mm.
Okay, then you've done what you can do. There's a phrase in English, I don't know if you have it there in the Philippines, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Yeah.
Um, so when you've offered something,
Yeah.
I sometimes think of what it would have been like if I was able at my age to be back there at age 13 or whatever, and to be able to walk in and talk to my mother about what life could be like if she was able to somehow face her own sense of guilt about her
Mm.
mother
Mm.
and the horrible feelings that that's produced. Of course, I didn't know that was going on.
Yeah.
If I was able to talk to my dad about some of his tragedies and about how drinking actually was making it worse, not better. I wish I could have had those conversations, and I don't know if he would have listened or she would have listened, but
Uh,
at least you'd know that you gave it a try. And now, for those of you who are listening, who are thinking, I've got a family member, here's my suggestion: start with yourself.
mm.
Because one of the cool things about ACT is these processes are normal processes.
Mm.
Psychological flexibility is built on a psychology of the normal. It's how the mind can easily get in our own way. And so we all have challenges. I mean, everybody in the world looking at these horror screens, these horror shows on our TV screens called the Ukrainian War. Can you look at that without feeling horrible about it? I
Yeah.
don't know how you would. Well, okay, that means you've got plenty of work to do, or things to do and to learn. So consider a book like Get Out of Your Mind into your life. It's not a book only for people who have diagnosable mental illness.
Okay.
There is a recent, if I can give a reference to people, the World Health Organization recently put out a self-help program called Self-Help Plus. I will send you the link and you can share it in your podcast. Here's what after several studies, here's what the World Health Organization says about this protocol, this program, which consists of a cartoon book and audio tapes in your language. It's in 21 different languages, and it's free. Okay, it's free from the best public health and scientific group in the world, World Health Organization.
Mhm.
What they say, it says this extensively tested protocol is helpful for anyone who is stressed for any reason in any circumstance. So look, we know something about how to be of help, and that protocol was tested and shown that if you take
Mhm.
people who've been through war, it will
Mhm.
reduce the later development of mental health problems by 50%.
Mhm.
So why aren't you studying it if you're not? Because your children or you or somebody in your life is right on the edge of being distressed by war tonight when they turn on the television. So,
Yeah.
okay, let's get modern minds for this modern world and let's do that research. Now, it turns out it's an ACT protocol. It turns out that it's been studied in several large randomized trials. That's why they put it up that way and said such a dramatic thing. I didn't say that. I didn't say it's good basically for any kind of stress. The World Health Organization said that. Now, if we had a vaccine for COVID
Mhm.
2 years ago that the World Health Organization said this is good for anybody who has COVID, no matter what the circumstances, we'd be beating down the doors to get it.
Okay.
How come we're not doing that with this psychological vaccine
Okay.
of preparing us for the difficulty of being human when every night we have things right in front of us that are horrific,
Yeah.
and so do your children.
Yeah.
But we need modern minds for this modern world. This machine, this rocket ship, this computer you carry in your pocket that's 1,000 times more complicated than what landed people on the moon will give you every horror known to humankind instantly.
Mm.
You need to get your mind wrapped around how to live in that world. It's a different world. It's not grandpa's world. And so my bigger advice to the person who was wanting to approach a family member is start with yourself, work on your psychological flexibility skills. That's what that World Health Organization Self-Help Plus free program teaches. If you don't want to spend any money, just go to their website, download it, and you'll get an ACT cartoon book and an ACT tape. And you yourself see if it's useful, so that when you talk to your family member, you can say, look, I tried it and it's helpful to me.
Okay.
And I'm not crazy.
Uh-huh.
I do need help in
Okay.
walking through the modern world and with all of its stresses.
Okay. Wow. I wish I could have said that to so many people who've called me. Anyway. Anyway, so I still have a lot of questions. Actually, I have a question about the war too. But I don't want to miss that one about basketball because we're crazy about basketball.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, and I know you are.
I like basketball. I sure do. I'm a big Wolfpack fan. That's my University of Nevada. So I
Uh,
follow.
all right. Well, let me skip to something. Maybe I'll skip a few questions because I know that you only have about 15 minutes extra.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can push me if you want to ask her. Go ahead. Nobody's knocking on my door. My wife's being tolerant.
Okay, we can wait for the knock then.
Yeah.
I know what you mean now when you say you're a workaholic. Get a life, Steve. Anyway, so you're talking to somebody, some stranger from the Philippines, and
I know. But I know that you talk to people, and I know that maybe somebody needs a little bit of help. So I
all
think of
right.
it that
Thank you, Steve.
while
Thank
I'm
you.
on the planet, I try to be useful. You never
All right.
know. I get
Okay.
emails from people saying, I listened to this, I saw that, and then this happened. Very sweet emails. So sometimes you can reach people when they need it. So I take advantage of the opportunity if I can.
Okay. All right. So uh why don't we do this? Let's say 5 minutes for every question. Is that okay? From here on? I
Sure.
have about 6. All right. So skepticism about behavioral therapy. When I was in my graduate studies, one of the things that got embedded in my mind is, why should I listen to Skinner? He thinks
Yeah.
we're like rats. So that's and then, is there a history to this? And can you tell our audience more about this behavioral therapy, behavioral approaches? How can
Sure.
this be addressed by a behaviorist like you?
Sure. Well, behaviorists got some things right. They wanted it to be evidence-based and scientific. They wanted principles that would apply. They wanted to apply it to individuals. They wanted principles that would allow you then to look at complexity and unpack it and say, oh, because of this process and that process, this is what's happening. The one mistake that Skinner made is he said his form of behaviorism was that everything you do is behavior. What you feel, what you think, what you remember. Not meaning it's all muscle movement. That's not what he meant. He meant the world within, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, your bodily sensations are all things you're doing.
Even feelings?
I mean,
Feelings are
yeah, of
behavior?
course.
Wow.
Feeling is something you're doing. It doesn't mean it's a movement. You are noticing something your body's doing. You're labeling it. I mean, it takes something like, I'm hungry.
Okay.
It's a complex set of things that are happening there, and noticing this, we could say, feeling of hunger. But it's as real as anything else. Now, it's hard to always get people to describe their feelings with precision, and Skinner was worried about that. But people don't know that about modern forms of behaviorism. The reason why you don't know that, even though Skinner himself was very clear, is that he made a mistake with language, because he said, well, you have all these private events, private experiences, and they're all legitimate, they're real, they're just other things that you're doing that are more subtle or noticed only by you and not by others, because skin presents kind of a barrier. You don't really have to understand that, understand the overt behavior, because they're all being shaped by the consequences of action. The reason why he said that is that he got language wrong. He got cognition wrong. What I am is a Skinnerian that thinks that cognition is important. It is behavior, I think, but I came up with an analysis that this, what we call cognition, higher cognition, is learning by relating, not by associating.
Okay.
Association works by things looking the same, or by them appearing together. It's kind of like if chalk was on this hand and you did this, it would be on that hand. That's sort of like what association is. Or if chalk's on this hand, then everything that looks like a hand sort of reminds you of that chalk.
Yeah.
So formal similarity and contiguity. What cognition is about is something more like this. I'm going to grab two things that are there in front of me. Okay. This is what I grab because it's just in front of me, right? And if I were to say, let's take a relation that's not association, but kind of very different. How about produced or caused? Okay. I give you a question. So we've got to answer this, or the whole podcast will blow up. All right. You have to answer. How does this produce or cause this?
Oh my gosh.
How would it be possible for this to cause this?
Okay. Is that a chapstick? Is that a chapstick?
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is.
Okay, a lip gloss.
How can you use this to cause this? Yeah.
How can I use the lip balm to cause the glasses?
Cause the glasses.
Well, it's the glasses can come out of the lip balm. I'm not sure. Maybe you can draw.
How would it? Yeah, give me an example. How could you make glasses come out of lip balm?
You can glasses come out of the. How can I make the glasses come out of the lip balm?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can draw a pair of glasses.
You could, if you're an engineer designing how to make glasses,
yeah,
you could probably get a sheet of paper and use this as a pen, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Or maybe you could melt this case. And could make a little plastic frame. Okay. There's 10 different things you could do, right?
Yeah.
Right. How did this cause this?
Well,
how could this be used to cause this?
You can see the lip balm better with the glasses.
Exactly. You could see it. Maybe you can see where to go buy it. In a sense, that's causing it. Now it's in my pocket. It was. Yeah. Maybe I could see the plans as how to make it.
Yeah.
So bad, I'll be able to see better, but then I can be the the creator of
Okay.
right? I
All
could
right.
melt these things and make the case.
Okay.
All right. Here's what I think cognition is. Here's the thing. You can take any two anythings in any relation, and you can always come up with an answer.
Yeah.
So either God made the world so that everything relates to everything else in every possible way,
Okay.
or this is an illusion of mind. What language does, what cognition does, is it allows us to relate anything to anything else in every possible way. And that allows us to think creatively, to imagine worlds that never have been, to come up with creations that don't exist on the planet.
Mhm.
But it also allows us to say, there's something wrong with me, or I'll never be lovable, or I'll never get over that horrible thing that happened.
Yeah.
It's not association. So we've been trying to make cognition work by these old ideas, like the ones that Skinner studied, operant and classical conditioning. Association through classical conditioning, Pavlov's dogs,
Yeah.
or through shaping, like dog training.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those processes are 500 million years old.
Mm.
We know that because every creature since the Cambrian period, which is 545 million years ago, 500 million years, do those processes. But what you and I are doing, only human beings do. And maybe the hominids, maybe the Neanderthals did. We don't know, they're dead and gone. But we know that the chimps don't do it.
Yeah.
Because the chimps won't do even the very, very easiest thing, that where if you teach a baby, these are called glasses, and then I say, where's the glasses? The baby will try to find them, not the chimp.
Mm.
The chimp, you have to train it in both directions. And we split off from the chimps 2.8 million years ago.
Mm.
So here's my point. We are living inside a system where we have this very new kid on the block called relational learning, symbolic meaning, symbolic thinking, relational thinking.
Mm.
And Skinner got it wrong, but we've cleaned that up. We have a better account. It's right now being used to help people learn how to talk if they don't talk well, to establish a sense of self, to increase their IQ, teach them new topics, to teach them reasoning and problem solving, on it goes. And ACT is based on relational framing, but it's different. So to those who say the behavior, how could you be a behaviorist? You can't be a classical push, pull, click, click, or it's nothing but chalk on one hand went to the other. Nothing other than what rats and pigeons do. I don't think you can create a full psychology of people that way. But that tradition has led to very new forms of how to think about cognition, which are very useful if you can't talk, etc., and very useful in things like ACT as to how to rein in the excesses of a mind once you're able to talk, reason, think, create rules, follow rules, and so on. So I kind of agree with both sides of your question.
Okay.
Behaviorists weren't good enough, but the modern behaviorists are. I mean, we've grown, we've changed, we're doing better, and still within our tradition. It's not like we suddenly changed our stripes. We just kept learning more.
Okay. All right. Okay. My next question is, I came from an angry background, so a lot of my clients, I see a lot of clients who struggle with anger. So, I also work with couples. So some of these issues, the more common issues are infidelity, and of course, the anger that comes with infidelity, or the guilt or whatever, or the frustration. So can you give our audience some pointers, how, either using ACT or PBT, how can you help those who suffer from anger, or someone who just discovered that there's an infidelity that happened?
Yeah, I mean, anger is this active emotion that is designed to remove aversive stimulation, aversive events. I mean, if you want to make a non-human animal angry, threaten them or take away something that's very important to them, take away their food, threaten them physically. And when we are under threat, when all of a sudden things are really going badly, when we've lost something or we've had something taken away, or we're attacked or threatened and our safety is threatened, we need anger. Anger is an appropriate emotion, but acting angrily versus feeling anger can carry us into spaces where we do things that we come to regret. We can attack people that we love, literally or verbally, in ways that are very hard to take back. Anger is sometimes the grease on the wheels to violence of all kinds.
Yeah.
And if you dig inside it, in addition to the pain, it sometimes includes this little cognitive element of this is not fair and it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Or, you did something wrong and you should pay. That kind of quality of you should be held to account. So what we do in ACT with anger issues is not try to eliminate the anger, but try to slow this process down so that we feel the anger as a feeling. We can notice the judgments. That's not fair. You shouldn't have done that. I'm being disrespected, so on. Also that we can sort of come back to what's present. And sometimes that there's a history of similar things like that. Sometimes you've been on that receiving end of angry outbursts. Yeah. My father had an anger problem. And when he was drinking, it could be fearsome. I mean, if I would get the feeling when he came home from the bar that he was in the wrong place, I would just run and hide. Because I knew the least little thing he could try to hit me or just go after me physically and whip me with a belt or something like that. I mean, he's a good man. He wasn't, back in the standards of discipline of the day, I wouldn't say that he was abusing me, but it was not safe to be around. He'd been drinking and when he was angry. And I very occasionally have angry outbursts myself. They're down to really low rate. But I've kicked the wall. I've punched a door in my whole life. Yes, I have. Have I kicked a person or punched a person? No, I don't think I have. But I've felt like it for sure. So I know the space. But I also know that if I slow it down, there's some things life is asking me to make room for, of the pain of disappointment or betrayal or something like that, and the self-judgment that comes with that, that's projected outward. Now you can, if you have a spouse, let's say, who's been unfaithful, you indeed may question whether or not this is a viable relationship. And that sober reality is perfectly fine to explore. Just let anger carry it for you. What anger does is it says, I'm going to remove that pain by attack or and while in the moment, it is true that in the moment you may get what feels like relief. Very, very soon after it, you have a number of things now that you got to face. I'll give an example. I used to play racquetball a lot, and I had a tendency to get angry with myself when I missed a particular shot that I was working on, this being able to flick the ball off the back wall. I worked on it, had it pretty good, but then occasionally I would just make a mistake and dang it, and then I'd whack the wall with the racket. Until my $400 racket broke. And at the time, I couldn't afford another $400 racket. I go, like, you idiot, what are you doing? The wall doesn't care. But, that whack on the wall, I did some research on this years ago, just children, when they're disappointed, they will hit dolls and things.
That's what I call a first world problem. We wouldn't do that here. Just kidding. All right. Anyway, $400. Throw it on the wall. No way.
I mean, it wasn't 400, but at the time it was a lot. I know that. I know I couldn't buy another one. Maybe it was 120 or something, but it was up there enough for me to really, as an
Okay.
assistant professor, have to work hard to produce it and really feel
That
bad
will
when
be
my
in a
boss.
vault here. That will be in a vault. Anyway.
So there are randomized trials on ACT for anger and CBT for anger, and it's not so much by diminishing anger, it's by slowing as a feeling. It's by
Yeah.
slowing it down in such a way that you get to have the feeling and
Yeah.
even open up a little bit and learn some about the thoughts that come in, the other feelings that are somehow right underneath it that you'll miss.
Okay.
Like you may miss that there's a feeling of sadness or betrayal or abandonment or
Yeah.
something like that. And
Yeah.
immediately it's covered over with anger, the active form, and
Yeah.
not the slower form of, I've been betrayed, oh, that hurts. That really hurts.
Uh,
And then being able to have the skills to go into that enough to learn from it and to direct that learning towards what you're trying to produce in your life.
okay. All right. Wow. That's really informative, Steve. I get stuck a lot of times with these cases. All right. The next one is, it's no longer the elephant in the room. It's the second elephant now, the pandemic. I heard you say something about, I don't know, I might have misquoted. I might misquote you or misunderstand you. You said that, why are we having virologists or epidemiologists talk to people about the vaccine? Why don't we get psychologists to convince people to get the vaccine?
Yeah.
Can you, what would that sound like if you were the one, or if psychologists were
Well,
the one?
yeah, absolutely. It's just shocking to me that in all these areas of immigration and climate control and, economic challenges and the pandemic and so forth, these all have behavioral psychological features to them. Choosing whether or not to get a vaccine is an action. Choosing whether or not to wear a mask is an action. Not touching your face is a mask, and social distancing is an action. Distancing is an action. And who's on the stage? I mean, here in our country, Fauci, was there telling you have to wear the mask, you have to not touch. I wrote a column early on how to not touch your face. Why?
Yeah.
Because I'd done research 20 years earlier for complete different reason. I was doing some research on behavioral assessment, and I was using touching your face as something that's easy to monitor. And it's just remarkable to me that almost never are psychologists there until we're talking about, are you depressed about the pandemic? Well, how about avoiding getting sick in the first place? Now, I understand we're not virologists. I'm really glad, it was a miracle that we came up with, the kind of vaccines we came up with as fast as we did. It's amazing. And a real achievement of of academic science. But
Okay.
yeah, there was a little racist thing that slipped in.
It's all right. It's all right.
Forgive me. But what people are meaning is they mean as opposed to indigenous science traditions that aren't necessarily experimental science traditions. But it's a miracle. It's wonderful. It's great. But here's what I would say, for example. I know there's a certain amount of vulnerability you feel when you get a vaccine.
Okay.
And it may really be worth thinking about what your values are.
Let's say you're Dr. Fauci and you're in front of a...
Fauci.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Fauci. I'm on stage. And I said, we've consulted with our psychologists. I'll tell you a little story about Dr. Fauci in just a second. We consulted with our psychologists. We have a few things to say. Instead of me just telling you about the probability of getting ill and all those kind of things, getting infected, you've heard that. You know that. You could probably tell me back the numbers, more or less. I would just ask you to tell me about what you care about most deeply and who you care about most deeply. And instead of why you should get vaccinated or something, can I just ask what you hope to live for?
Mm.
What will you do with the extra years of life that you might be given if you do get this disease, and because of the vaccination, you're able to get through it without dying or without injury or without not being able to function well. What would you do at that time? And just before you reject that out of it, just take a little moment to think about it. Are there grandchildren? Are there children? Is there a spouse? Is there somebody who needs you? Is there somebody who loves you, depends upon you? Are there people that you hope to serve? Is there work that you do? In your work, are you able to do things for people? Why do you even care about that? And whatever comes to mind, then my question to you is, if it were the case, and look and see, you can just look objectively at the evidence, that what I'm recommending would make it a little more likely that you get to do that. You get to have that. You get to contribute to that. You get to be there for your grandchildren and watch them graduate, or watch your grandchildren get married, or be there for the graduation of your, whatever came to mind, would you do it? And if the answer is yes, well, here's the way to do it. Call this number and schedule it. And don't do it for yourself, and don't do it for me. Do it for, here's an example. Just ask people to think about their values. And does this fit with their values? And a values-based public health campaign wouldn't be that hard to do. You could get major people who have real reputations, whatever, to talk about their personal values and why they take it. Not about, oh, I'm sure glad I talk it because now I'm not getting infected. You know, somebody says, I don't think I'm going to get infected. Why do I need to do it anyway? You know, that's not what it's about. That dry stuff is not what motivates people. What motivates people is love and loss and emotional, deep, values-based things.
Okay.
That's an example. You could walk around the hexagon if you're an ACT person and pick an intervention that fit almost every one of those processes. And I think we did a pretty poor job. Now, the story of Fauci that I was going to tell you is a former student of mine, Norm Anderson. I hope he doesn't hear this. He'll be probably mad I told the story, but was the first director of the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research in the National Institutes of Health, which was, the Congress said, you know, behavior really matters, social science really matters. You need to work with all of these, the Cancer Institute, the Heart and Lung Institute, et cetera, on and on, the virologists, and help them to see the importance of behavior, okay? And my former student, Norm Anderson, who later became the CEO of American Psychological Association, president of the Society for Behavioral Medicine, et cetera, a major scientist, was the director. And he told me that he interacted with all the directors, and lots of them said, you're right, behavior is really important. But he had one real problem child, no matter what he did, would say back, behavior doesn't have anything to do with what I'd study and what I fund. And who is that director? That would be Fauci. So here he comes 15 years later, and he's on television about what? Behavior. You know, getting a vaccine, wearing a mask. You know, this isn't a chemical. The vaccine's a chemical, but the behavior. So, Dr. Fauci, you did need more. You did need that knowledge. You didn't think you needed that knowledge at the time. But immunology is very much linked to behavior. Pandemics are very much linked to behavior. So, I wish mainstream health sciences and the sciences in general. I mean, I mentioned the World Health Organization. There it is, but I use that example, you know, in fact, I had a conversation with my dean today, who's a physicist, and I said, you know, my university hasn't said a single word about what the World Health Organization is doing with ACT, with war trauma. And I said, if I had invented a vaccine, you would be all out on the street saying, oh my God, our university is so wonderful. We invented a vaccine to help with COVID. No, I didn't do that, but I did help come up with something that will prevent the mental health costs of these horrifying things. Behavioral scientists are just not yet thought of by the culture.
Uh,
Although the last thing I said to my dean today, she won't see this, so I can say it. I said, here's the one thing I know, Catherine. If your kid develops an addiction, you're calling me up. If you develop a panic disorder, you're calling me up. If your husband gets depressed, you're calling me up. And so I just want the university to think about that fact, and then maybe, just maybe, put some of the behavioral science that we developed here out so people can know that we're doing our job. We're trying to figure out a way to support humanity, and don't just wait until the train wrecks happen. Try to prevent that and give people the tools they need to live lives that are full of purpose and meaning.
yeah, that's really a very good segue to my next question. And that's the elephant in the room, which is the war.
Okay. Yeah.
What's our part as therapists, as psychologists? I don't know if Putin ever saw a psychologist in the past, but these are generations of people who experience different contexts in their lives. So how can we make for a better, more peaceful world in the work that we do?
Well, in the same way you were asking the question about anger and so forth, this process of slowing down and of noticing what's there, of taking the perspective of others, of visiting what your values are, of being able to, notice your own mind sometimes pushing you into spaces and asking you to do things that are not good for yourself or others. I understand that there's big international conflicts and so forth, and struggles over oil, natural resources, water, and all these kinds of things. But yet, long run, the one thing that is really obvious to us in the modern world is that we're all interconnected. We're one human community, not a whole bunch of little disparate ones. If climate change isn't reined in, there's entire parts of the world that'll be unlivable, but all of them will be impacted. If the immigration crisis that will come from the number of people who would have to be escaping for their lives, and of course they'll go across borders, just like it's happening right now with the Ukrainian war. Physical war being a really, really good example of that same kind of thing. And on and on and on it goes. My point being that these major social problems that are happening, we have to be part of the solution of softening, connecting the human community in such a way that it can be able to take the perspective of others, to be more loving and cooperative in their interaction with others, and to find a way to accommodate difference. It used to be that we could be quite comfortable in our own little groups, and we are the tribal primates. We evolved in small bands and groups, and they were defined narrowly. Yeah, but if you get on a plane, you might have somebody sitting next to you who's wearing a burqa, and somebody sitting on the other side who is has a turban, and somebody, on and on and on. Well, it didn't used to be like that. You had your own little cultural group and religious group and language group. And so we're going to have to, as psychologists, help people to learn how to live inside a diverse and multifaceted world on all these different things of religion and language, but not in a way that's just a blender. It doesn't mean culture doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything we've taken away, any more than in your marriage relationships, that your personality is taken away when you learn how to relate well to your partner. That's not what people experience. You're not diminished by being able to relate well to your partner. And in the same way, we're not diminished as a human community when we can speak across these barriers of language and religion and cultural traditions and economics and so on. And the alternatives to that in the modern world is unacceptable. The alternative to cooperation around climate change is unacceptable. Around the pandemic is unacceptable. Around this war we're looking at. what I tell people sometimes when they come to me with the pain of their background, with their panic disorder, their trauma, or the betrayals, or the things that have happened, is I said, yeah, and let's look at this horrible thing and flip it over and tell me what that tells you about what you care about. And people can always do it. And then I'll say something like, okay, well, I'll snap my fingers and remove this painful thing completely. Unfortunately, so completely that you will no longer even know anything about it, and you will not know anything about how it links to what you care about. And people usually don't want to make that bargain. They want to have wisdom without pain. They want to know that love matters without ever experiencing what it's like to have love lost. Or that peace matters without looking at what happens when peace disappears and the horror that it unleashes. So let's learn from our mistakes, and we're seeing it unfold right now in this war. And I'm not very interested. We did can I tell a little story again? Why is there an ACBS? Why is there an Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, which is the ACT group? And the answer is because I was going to give a workshop in Sweden. I was getting on a plane on September 11th, 2001 to fly to Sweden. And I got a call saying to turn on the television, and I watched the Twin Towers fall, and there was no planes taking off. 2 years later, we had that conference, but we turned it into the first world conference on ACT, relational frame theory, and the new form of behavioral psychology we're trying to form. It became the first ACBS conference. And so the seeds of it was that horror. But what I did after the Twin Towers came down and so forth, I went to my lab and I said, this is before I knew that ACBS was going to form 2 years later in Sweden at Linköping with the first conference. I said, we're going to start studying something different in the lab. We're going to study stigma and prejudice. And I said, and you watch what's about to happen. I bet you our political leaders are not wise enough to say that these were evil deeds. My guess is they will say these are evil people. And sure enough, wasn't 2 months later, and I gave out in that, the President of the United States talked about the evil ones. And then we got to see the pictures of Abu Ghraib with naked Muslim men piled up with American soldiers, smiling, with big words written on their back, rape me. Shaming this Islamic men, to forcing them into something that looked like a homosexual pile.
That
was our soldiers. But that was our president putting something in the water that could lead to that. And how is that better? How is that better, than flying the planes into the buildings? So I think we have to be part of the solution. We need to be thinking about how objectification and dehumanization happens and what to do about it. I'm very proud of the fact that there's a whole body of research on stigma, shame, prejudice, issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and so forth inside the ACT community. And it goes back to the formation of the Association of Contextual Behavioral Science, because we were born in the crucible of one of the most horrific events in the history of the modern world, done, I think, out of prejudicial hate, and met with a response that included prejudicial hate. So I think we have to do better.
All right.
If George Bush said those are the evil deeds and we were going to hold them responsible, we wouldn't have had Abu Ghraib. Those are the evil ones. Of course you're going to get that.
Okay.
Of course you're going to get that. What do you think's going to happen? You just set on unleashed. Now, he did say some kind things about Islamic world and so forth, and he protected imams. So I don't want to just dump on George Bush, but boy, that was a mistake.
Okay.
I think as psychologists, that's part of our job, is learn how to soften, connect, take the perspective of others, create a more values-based cooperative world. And if I could point to one thing we've done in the ACT community, we've expanded out to include even evolutionary principles out of Eleanor Ostrom's Nobel Prize-winning core design principles with the program called Pro-Social. So if you don't know anything about it, go to prosocial.world, and you can easily learn about it and find out who's out there as trainers of working with small groups to produce greater cooperation within and between groups of people. And ACT is relevant. It's part of the protocol. It's part of the, but also some other things that are part of how cooperative groups form.
Okay. So there's actually a second part to that question. In terms of Filipinos, we're mostly a lower middle class country. To some of it is really poor. So how would you talk to someone who's suffering from the economic impact that this war has produced? Oil is skyrocketing, you know. So inflation is crazy here. So what would you advise someone?
Well,
real problems with, but
yeah. I mean, in the history of the world, when things like that really get tough, getting through it usually involves your friends and family and people who love and care, coming together and forming community. And I would say, let's look at what we've done as a people. I mean, my guess is this Filipino people have a lot of experiences in their communities and their families and so forth as to how to work together, even amid real absence of resources and so forth. So a big challenge like this maybe is a time to go back to basics. How can we come together and work together? And you'll find that some of the ACT skills are helpful there. And maybe some of the things like what I suggested with pro-social. And even before the politicians get their act together and the global economic system adjusts and big things that we're caught in that we probably can't individually control, wars and all the rest happen, at least we can focus on what our values are and gather together in values-based groups to do what we can to soften the burden on others and ourselves. You know, you look at what people are doing, you know, I was watching a little film about what people were doing in the basements in Ukraine to help the old people and to care for each other and so forth. And it would almost make you weep with the amount of kindness and care with people who have almost nothing, you know, they barely have water and food, you know. So I don't know what we're capable of as a human species. I know it's a lot. Maybe I would suggest that we take advantage of even this kind of horror to really think again about what do we most deeply care about, and to try to create a culture that empowers us to cooperate and work together. So that might mean who's in the next department over who doesn't have anything. That might mean, you know, how about your family member who maybe needs some help from you?
Wow. All right.
No, to the ACT community around the world, I'm talking to you across many thousands of miles. We did a thing just 2 days ago. I was giving a talk in Denmark. And I said, yeah, I'll give the talk, etc. And they came to me and they said, will you open it up so anybody can see this talk live streamed? And I said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to charge money or whatever? And they said, well, we're thinking of doing is saying on the honors system, anybody who makes a contribution to the people in the Ukraine can watch it. And I said, that's great. By the way, I'll donate the honorarium.
Mhm.
So we raised $1,000 for, well, $4,000 for Ukrainian children.
Yeah.
And then an additional $1,000 actually for Iranians who can't get training because they've been cut off by sanctions.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a tiny thing. I'm in a
Yeah.
conversation right now with people in Russia who are having to look at what's happening with their government, sending out their children to commit crimes that will live with them forever as a moral injury. Some of those soldiers will never be right again because they were the ones who shot that person whose arms were tied to their back. They were told to by their commanding officer. And that'll be in their dreams when they're my age. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm mad at Putin, but I'm not. The Russians are not the evil ones. Some of what's being done there is evil. Yes, that's true. But that doesn't mean those young Russian soldiers who are suddenly found themselves in this ridiculous situation are evil people. So it's pretty easy, I think, for us to self-soothe at the cost of hardening our hearts, you know?
Wow, that's very deep. I wish you could ask more about that, but I don't think we have time. Anyway, I think what you're saying is that people can reach out for help, for assistance. And there's a lot of shame in our culture. So it's hard to reach out when you suddenly, life takes a turn for worse, and it's hard to admit that you need help. And I get what you're saying. It's time to reach out, diffuse from the shaming thoughts and start connecting. All right. So penultimate question. I have two more questions. Is that okay?
That's good.
All right. Nicholas Ternecki said once that for him, if there was one single most impactful thing that ACT has contributed to the field of psychology, it would be diffusion. I'm not sure if I'm quoting him correctly. For me, I think it's diffusion and values.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know what it is that you consider is your biggest contribution in the field of psychology.
I think long run, it's going to be relational frame theory. I think long run, if relational operance, if relational learning is really the seed, the smoking gun, the beginning, as we get onto it, as we learn to deal with it, so many things are going to happen. And I see it happening. And I don't know that it will ever come back and people say, oh my goodness, relational frame theory is such a, it may even be forgotten. But some of the things that we're doing are feeding into things like the language development processes that are going on in deep mind or in big data, where you're trying to understand how language works, teach robots to understand language, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. I don't know how far we can go, but I am so excited by things like the trials now with teaching relational learning to children who are very low intellectually, and watch move right up intellectually. And yeah, they may not reach some spectacular thing, but people who've been, kind of waved away, they're never going to be able to do it, and so forth. And here you see these improvements, and in some pretty good randomized trials, and now some really big trials with RFT, relational frame theory kind of programs for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and entire school systems in a carefully done study. The state of Hawaii is committed to such a thing with hundreds of people in each group. We're not very far away from being able to look and say, yes, we can actually dramatically increase. Diffusion is a direct extension of RFT in the sense of we're trying to alter the impact of relational framing that narrows people, where the excessive domination of rules, that crushes you, can be seen and appreciated and learned from and thought about in different ways without it crushing you. Values of kind of exploring what's really so, and then what, being able to put them into words.
Okay.
What do you really care about? What are the intrinsic qualities? What are the consequences that are right inside your behavior that you really want to have there? And if you take a values exercise, like name a hero and tell me why you think they're a hero. And are those qualities that you see in that person qualities that you would like to put into your behavior? And almost always the answer is yes. And how would you do that? And then they have ideas. So those two are how to sort of augment the healthy use of language and diminish the unhealthy use of language to create more cognitive flexibility, but to create more motivational focus. And if we can play both sides of this, then what we're doing is we're taking this evolutionarily recent thing that's only been around for 400,000 years to 2.8 million years, somewhere in there. Probably a little older than Homo sapiens, but because I think from burial rituals and so forth, it's pretty clear that Neanderthals and so forth, the hominins were doing symbolic thought. Pretty clear that the chimpanzees don't, and that's 2.8 million years. So we're in that time frame. You know, they were babies. We're just learning. I know that sounds like a lot of years, but my goodness, how long has science been on that issue? A few hundred years. A few hundred years. And some of the models were perfectly sensible. Association, it's like chalk on one hand or the other. Wrong, but perfectly reasonable. Skinner's verbal operants, wrong, but perfectly reasonable. Well, actually, they're right until you get a mental age of about 3, and then they're wrong. They're a start, but they're not the whole thing. So the thing I hope I've contributed content-wise is that, but I think the other thing I hope maybe is this. I'm a guy who came into psychology because of Abraham Maslow and peak experiences and things like that. I'm a guy who developed a panic disorder and who watched how real harsh things worked in his home for reasons that he didn't understand until just a little while ago. That's how long it took me to really realize what was really going on there, and tried to come up with principles that could be scaled to be able to understand something like that and do something about that. I know it's inadequate. I know it's only the beginning, but I hope what I think I'm most proud of, what I am most proud of, and I hope what I'm remembered for is that I've given my all to try to develop high precision, high scope principles that can be applied to human complexity and can make a life a little better for people who suffer and for people who yearn for greater prosperity. And with the help of thousands of people, I never allow people to say, I developed ACT or developed RFT. No, I instigated it. I lit the match that started the fire. Other people brought the wood and made the bonfire. I didn't do that. I just lit the match. And it's a small thing. I'm proud of it, but it's not the big thing that's happening. And it's only one thing. It's probably wrong in many ways. We'll find out how it's wrong as we all get in, and then we'll learn from those mistakes and we'll come up with something new and we'll move forward. And that's what human progress looks like. And behavioral science has a role. So if you put everything I've said, you can put it together to say, I'm the guy who's hoping that behavioral science will eventually be seen as a field, psychology and all the rest, that can help us rise to the challenge of the human condition.
All right.
That'll take us hundreds of years, but it's a worthwhile journey.
All right.
This conversation, in some small way, is a step on that journey. So thank you for the opportunity, my friend. Much appreciated.
Can I have one more question?
Yes, you can.
It's about basketball.
Okay.
I want to end this on a lighter note. All right.
Good.
I know you like basketball. I played basketball when I was in high school. I made the batch team. I was first 5. I was the part of the starting 5 in practice. But when it came to the game, I would have jitters. So so goes my dreams of being a professional basketball player. Anyway, so if you were I know ACT is being used in sports.
Yes, around the world, sure is.
So how would you, like, if you were, going to, what distinguishes a good, a great player to a, average player is when what you do in the clutch moments. So how would you use ACT to help somebody like me who has jitterbugs?
Yeah, well, I can almost guarantee you those jitterbugs included thought that wasn't needed, and evaluations, self-criticisms, guidance, and so forth that wasn't needed. And not only that, it interfered. I mean, your body can know how to hit a shot or hit a ball or do an athletic performance in ways that your mind will never understand. And
Okay.
so there's a famous phrase from the Yogi Berra, who is both a coach and a player, an all-star baseball player, who had a phrase he would use. It was, "Don't think, just hit." And the highly trained athlete, their body knows more than their mind. And the coaches very often are giving them guidance that would be perfectly fine if you were dealing with a beginner. Hold the bat this way, shoot the ball that way, put a backspin, make sure, etc. But when you actually get to the high performers, the people who've trained for thousands of hours, the bigger thing is to help get their mind out of the way and allow their body to do the performing, allow their body to do the learning too, including through injury and so forth. I went to spring training 2 years ago, right before COVID, because the Toronto Blue Jays adopted ACT as their main approach, professional baseball team. And so I was able to go and watch. My dad was a professional baseball player at the very lower levels, injured his arm. That's one reason he became an alcoholic. He couldn't stand the wound of losing his vision of being a good athlete. But I know he was looking down somewhere and smiling because I was there in spring training. And they paid the money to fly me out there. And I was a horrible baseball player, but boy, I'm there as an ACT coach. And what they were doing were teaching people to rein in the excesses of the mind, come back to the present moment, and then allow them to sort of live their legacy, which was the phrase that they used for values. Each of these features in a psychological flexibility model belong in sport. But the other thing that they were doing that I thought was wonderful is they were thinking about the whole person. I'll give you an example. They were using ACT to help train the ball players in relationships. Why? Because when they look at rising stars who then plummet, one of the big predictors of it is having relationship problems at home. And if you've ever had relationship problems, of course that's true. I mean, if you can be a world-class tennis player, but if you're thinking about your wife cheating on you, you're not going to be able to focus on that topspin forehand coming at you, coming up to your backhand, where you're going to have to execute a shot that's very difficult for you. So keeping the players fully in balance, teaching them relationship skills, working with things like money management, things like that, but also how to manage the adulation and so forth, and keep a mental balance, mindfulness skills, focus on their values, but then also teaching them in rehab and during normal training. They actually got some of the coaches who were working on the technical skills to include some ACT elements. And then everything became baseball oriented. Let me just give you an example. They're trying to teach people how to let go of difficult thoughts or emotions. Like, let's say you're in a negative hitting streak, and so you're thinking about what your batting average is, and you know that if you don't get it back up, you're going to be sitting on the bench. If you sit on the bench, you might get set back down. Now from the majors, you're to the minors. You could lose everything. Your salary could go away. There's a lot happening there, right?
Yeah.
They would do things like ask the person to hold on to 4 baseballs at once, which you can do with great strain. They would ask them to let go of just one of the ball, and then notice that it's a lot easier to hold it. And I'd say, like, if these were thoughts what would it look like to let go of one of them? Which one would you let go of? So they had all these great baseball metaphors for every act element. They never used the word acceptance, diffusion, never. It was all phrased in a way that an athlete could understand, cast in terms of their own sport. When I was in China, I visited some of the folks who were working with the Chinese Olympic Committee, because ACT was actually kind of big in China, and including in the Olympic Committee.
Wow, really? Oh.
Each one had their own acty way of talking about their particular sport. So I'm excited to see that, and I've been doing some research in my lab on this. My lab is winding down, but we've done a couple studies. I'll give you two examples, really very quick, 30 seconds with sports. One, we were doing planking. You know what a plank is?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And we see how long people could plank. And these are with long distance runners who really need the core strength that plank can help with. And so we tested out different ways of doing it. And one of the ways were things like you would take the thoughts that came up right when you are thinking, I can't do it anymore, blah, 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 blah. And they would mentally sing them or mentally. Now you'd recognize that, right? Or we do acceptance work and so forth. And we showed that the ACT processes did really well in helping people plank a really long time. Then we, in another study, we took with static holding, where we had a ring and you had to hold a 1 pound weight through for as long as you can. We took some things that were in standard coaching, like focus on the form, make sure that you're keeping it a particular way, you know. And sure enough, focusing on accepting the aversive feelings was far more useful than focusing on the form. Another study was spinning, where focusing on the values of doing the exercise was way better than focusing on doing the exercise in the precisely correct way. So I think the world of sport has a lot to learn from the third wave of CBT, and specifically from ACT. There's quite a bit of research going on there. We've only published one of those 3 studies I just mentioned, but we're going to get them out the door in the next few months.
All right. By the way, Steve, before you go, I have that book behind you. I ordered it, came in from the US. Learning process based, yeah. And Liberated Mind, I have it in ebook version.
Awesome.
You know, it's your turn to make a. I hear sometimes Kevin Polk say your shameless commercial.
Well, I don't have a shameless commercial. I would say this: if anybody wants to follow my work, go to stephenchayes.com.
Yeah.
Stephen with a P, middle initial C for Charlie. That's my dad's name. Hayes, Hayes, stephenchayes.com, and just click on yes, please send it to me. I'll send you a little 7-item mini series, 7 emails that come out in an autoresponder. It's all automated. And then I'll send you my newsletter, which will happen 1 or 2 times a month. I don't spam people, but if you ever feel like you don't like it, it's not worthwhile, it's a 1-click opt out, and I'll take you off my list. So if you want to follow me, do that, and I'll try to send you some things that are useful to you, whether you're a professional or just a person who's trying to understand their own mind.
Okay. All right.
So
if there's ever
shameless commercial.
I'm sorry.
That's my shameless commercial.
Okay. Well, if there's a word to describe this, maybe spellbinding, amazing, awesome. I don't know. So thank you, Steve. This is a dream come true,
Awesome.
interviewing you. And thank you in behalf of the Filipino people.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope that I've served. Peace, love, and life.
Take care.
Take care.